Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the next episode of StreamTime Sports. My name is Chris Stone, the community lead, joined as always by our CEO, Nick Meacham. Now, Nick, it's an exciting time. The Olympics will be coming up soon. I don't know if it'll have officially started by the time this podcast is released, but certainly within a couple days of that. Do you have a favorite event, Nick? I feel like the Summer Olympics always gets maybe a little bit more love than the Winter Olympics, but are there any particular Winter Olympic events that stick out to you? I can't imagine Australia being particularly great at the Winter Olympics, but maybe that's a wrong assumption of my part.
It's not a wrong assumption. We've had a couple of moments over the years that have caught the country by surprise, I would say. Starting with, have you heard of Steve Bradbury?
Nope.
Oh, so basically, he was this Aussie who actually was one of the best in the world for a while, and he made the final of this short track ice skating, speed skating, where they would go around in the tight circle that they do. And that particular year, he basically fell way back, like last by a mile. He was almost just coasting around in the final. It was almost a bit embarrassing watching it, going, oh, this is a bit of a shame. And then at the end, everyone crashed into each other, and then he crossed the line with gold. And so you saw the second place, third place, and everyone was like literally crawling on their hands and knees. It was on the final turn, and he went past without even having to try and skate. It's a famous thing. So doing a Bradbury basically is what we used to call it in Australia, where everyone basically falls down in front of you and you somehow get a win. So that lives on in Australian folklore, particularly around the Winter Olympics. And we've had a couple of others as well. We had a couple of good what do you call it? Like jumpers, basically. They were ski jumpers that could do all the acrobatic tricks. So that was another one of our sports. But for me, in terms of watching biathlon, I'm pretty bit of a fan of these days because of its coverage here. Freestyle skiing's pretty cool. Luge, I think, is pretty fun to watch. Actually, looking through the list of them, I think I like them all. The only one I'm really curious is what the hell is ski mountaineering? That's a new one, apparently, that's joined the Winter Olympics mix that I'm intrigued by.
Well, I came up, watching Cool Running, so the bobsled is always going to be something that I enjoy watching. And then the other one as well is the ice hockey. I know that probably sounds a little bit too simple, but I think one of the arguments I'd make is with baseball and with hockey, so Major League Baseball and NHL, is playoff style hockey and playoff style sort of knockout competition in those sports is really great. And, obviously the American in me, there's always the famous Miracle on Ice and, the US versus the Canadians. And I don't even think the Russians are there allowed in the Olympics anymore, but like there is something about knockout style ice hockey that I think always ups the ante a little bit and is always good, exciting, good rivalry.
So what's actually quite big here in Sweden anyway, and probably most of the Nordics, is they have the World Championships for ice hockey every year. Is it every year? And they also have the juniors. And those competitions are massive because Sweden's got a chance of actually getting a decent result. So the patriotism behind it is definitely a thing. And I love the blend you get between like the NHL professional players and everyone else, a bit like you do with basketball, I suppose.
Yeah.
So I'm a big fan of watching ice hockey because anyone can win at any particular time. At the same time, it's always dominated by the big few teams. But I more enjoy those sports that I never get a chance to watch. I did that with the Summer Olympics as well. But the tobogganing not tobogganing, God, the bobsledding is definitely one to watch. And I think I was listening to the Sports Pro podcast where Steve McCaskill was talking about the technology improvements around broadcast and so forth. So it could be a real spectacle to watch it because you start to get a better feel for how steep those tracks are that they operate on. They don't look that steep on screen, but with the way they use drones these days, he talked about the fact that it could be a whole different viewing experience, which I'm quite excited about.
Yeah, and I think as well, it feels like the last couple of Winter Olympics, maybe I've not paid enough attention, haven't maybe been in the correct time zone. So the being in Italy will definitely help. It feels like the last couple of Winter Olympics have been not necessarily viewer friendly for us in the UK in terms of being able to do that. So, I mean, we talk about it all the time, how much do time zones impact things, but that certainly at least make it a little bit easier, more accessible. I certainly know when we're in the office at Sports Pro, there will be a screen that just has the Olympics playing nonstop.
That is no doubt. And I'm just trying to remember, Kay, do you remember what was the last Winter Olympics host? I think I do.
I thought it was in
Yes.
Japan, or is Japan the one after this one?
So it was in Beijing.
Oh, okay.
So I did remember. I thought that was the case, but then I had to have a quick look
Had a
just to
quick
double
doubt,
check that it
yeah.
was a bit. Yeah, a random one. But when Russia hosted it, they hosted it Sochi.
Correct.
I actually had to go to Sochi for the sport accord event many years ago before they were hosting it. I think it was in 2014. And what I didn't know when I was flying there is that actually Sochi is a summer beach town, beach resort. And they basically also tried to make it into a winter resort. That's one of the
Dude.
reasons they took that on. I have no idea how well it went, but I'm pretty sure the temperatures were not the best when they hosted it there. So definitely some random destinations, because Beijing obviously has hosted the Summer Olympics
Yeah.
in 2008 as well.
Yeah, I think that's maybe why I didn't think Beijing, because I knew they'd have the summer Olympics. I did actually know that about Sochi, that it was actually a summer destination. But yeah, I do think things being in Italy will certainly, selfishly for us in the UK, just make it a little bit more accessible.
I'm a bit gutted I'm not going to go, but it just kind of crept up on me. I sort of
Yeah.
didn't even think about it. And next thing you know, about 3 weeks ago, I heard people starting to talk about it. And okay, well, I've already got plans. I'm actually on holiday in the middle of it, so hopefully, I mean, on a holiday in the middle of it skiing. So I'm hoping I can get
Nice.
in my quiet time, look at how I should be doing it versus how I am doing it on the slopes.
Yeah, yeah. Well, like I said, I think we mentioned in the Summer Olympics, and it should be the same for the Winter Olympics, probably even more for the Winter Olympics. They should always make just one average person compete in every event, just to give you a standard of like how bad you actually are compared to what you think you could do if
Oh,
you
I'd
saw it
love
on
that.
TV.
I would love that. Though imagine there'd be some pretty frightening injuries happening. Someone trying to go down
Yeah.
some of those ski slopes.
Yeah.
Love the double black diamond runs that exist. That you see those guys speeding their way down on. So yeah, I'd love that concept.
What I will say is, you and I have had the conversation. Is it time to delete Twitter? And we're not even going to talk about Twitter, but I'm just going to use this as the segue. I sent you what I thought was a really class A tweet, which was, there's this common, meme video of this guy in a really fancy restaurant, and he's doing the whole swirling the wine
Yep.
glass, taking a sniff to look really posh. And basically, it was that video, and the caption was me finally watching UFC legally for the first time. And it was a perfect tweet, because I totally got the reference. And it is to have to do with the fact that after the deal that we've talked about for a long time with Paramount Plus and their 7-year, $7 billion deal with the UFC has finally come to fruition. And we've seen it in the flesh, and they had their very first event. But it was funny that the initial reaction I saw on social media was people just being like, it's a bit weird not watching this on a pirated stream.
I mean, that's definitely a good message for the executives that they've made potentially the right decision there.
Yeah.
Look, I think it's the initial numbers show that they've had immediate success by moving on to a platform like Paramount. So I think everyone will be pretty happy with what those numbers are, which we can run through in a second. But it goes to show, just I think people for a long time now have just been finding ways to go watch content, and they're quite happy to take the cheapest and freest way available, even if it means doing it illegally. And we've seen plenty of examples like that. And I think when looking at some of the numbers that did come out in the ratings, it really was a proof case to me of how mainstream UFC and indeed mixed martial arts is. I was quite shocked by the scale of them.
Yeah, well, some of the numbers, as you say, the live average minute attendance, which I probably need a refresher on what that specific stat is, was 4.96 million viewers approximately. Peak concurrence was at 5.93 million, and total households reached was just over 7 million. By those numbers, it would have been the largest event in Paramount Plus history for live events, and reportedly reached more homes than any UFC event in nearly a decade. And just to give some context to this, I did some research, thank you, ChatGPT, on what were the most pay-per-view buys in UFC history. So Khabib versus McGregor was number one, UFC 220, 2.4 million buys. So essentially half the number of viewers that are reported. The next one was Poirier versus McGregor, 1.8 million, and then it goes 1.6, 1.6, 1.6. Now, obviously, we know at these things, when you're buying pay-per-view, it's very rarely just the one person watching it. There's usually a party involved with it. But in terms of, essentially double the number of households that, reported from a streaming perspective. So to your point, it does give a bit of a context sort of where that is. And I think one of the difficult things about this conversation, Nick, we'll get into it, is it's not quite an apples to apples comparison. Because one of the other things as well is just the advertising and all that. But to your point, there were good numbers behind it from what we get from the initial reports, and who knows how many people were watching that with friends.
Yeah, look, it's interesting because I did see that those numbers that they shared were platform viewers. They weren't doing any sort of ratings count where they average amount of people watching a view like Nielsen would. So those numbers actually are even better than they sound. Now, it's difficult comparing them with a pay-per-view, right? Because pay-per-view, obviously, they're getting so much more revenue per user and per buy that you can't really compare. However, looking at some of those events you referred to, well, McGregor was the top four out of those
Yeah.
fights, and then the one after that was UFC 100, which I think we're on 300 and something now, right? So that was
342,
that's
something like that. Yeah.
342. So that's years ago that they were reaching those sort of numbers. So really, what those numbers show to me is that the pay per view bubble had definitely burst. They weren't getting anywhere near what they were many moons ago. Because if they were, I don't think they would have moved away from the pay-per-view
Yeah.
approach. And that's why they had to take this step, because the economics otherwise, for what they were generating for UFC 220 at 2.4 million buys, just smashes what just happened out of the park. But that is more the exception. And you almost have to like ignore those and look what the average was for everything else underneath that McGregor era. And then you can see that they had a big gap to overcome. So it's, I think it's, firstly, I did a quick review of this. Did you have any comments on what I said there? Because I had to look at some numbers on other events as well that I want to share.
Yeah, well, I mean, I try to do just some fun maths, like totally just pull some stuff out. And I think a UFC fight pay per view used to be $80 a fight. So if you did the math of the 2.4 million that did the Khabib versus McGregor fight, that comes out to about 190 million. So you're talking
Wow.
about a big, massive event. And I did some math. The subscription plan that comes with ads on Paramount Plus is $8.99. So if you multiply that by the 5.93 peak viewership, that only gets you 53 million. So you're only talking about a quarter of the money. If you did the full one without the ads, it comes out to 13.99 a month, which gets you to 83 million. So to your point, significantly lower than what would have been from a pay-per-view fight. But what I try to get ChatGPT to do was give me the average number of pay-per-view fights from UFC 100 onwards. And it gets a little murky because obviously UFC only shares when the stats are in their favor, but they're like realistically 2.4 is the high end, 500,000 is probably a bit more realistic, which brings you out to about 40 million per event, which means this would have gone above what that average one was. So you kind of have to balance out the really mega events with the low end events. And then the question becomes, to your point, Nick, are you better off and just more secure by having that reoccurring check that's going to come in without having to have a McGregor carry those major events, event in and event out?
Well, yeah. Look at the examples you've shared, and are obviously of the yesteryear. They weren't delivering those anymore. They weren't achieving those numbers, and in fact, most signs are pointing to in boxing they're moving away from pay per view. So the writing's been on the wall that model is going to keep deteriorating. So those economics, I mean, they're best case because obviously there's loads of people on free plans and people aren't just buying for sports, but it gives you a bit of a sense of how big the gap was for the pay per view day, the glory days. Look. This was a good way for them to secure their future. And this is one UFC event, right? They're going to be having so many more on the platform. I think outside of the UFC's core events as well, that they'll have a lot more content to share. And it's clearly been a needle mover for Paramount. I'll be interested to see if they ever share any data on how many new subscribers they achieved as a result of that. That's obviously going to be the real benchmark for this. But looking at some of the numbers, I thought it'd be worth having a little look at to try to get a comparison of how significant these sorts of numbers are. You said the average minute audience was about 5 million, peak households 7. Well, for context, I did get a bit of my own research, Chris.
There we go.
So an NBA game, like national televised game, a regular game gets about 1.4 to 1.8.
Yeah.
Okay. Playoffs get between 3 to 6 million. And NBA finals get 10 to 13. Now, think about the NBA finals. I think the NBA finals number, 10 to 13, is actually a better comparison because at around 6-7 million people, I would estimate that if you replicated the Nielsen kind of ratings approach, that number will be much closer than you would think there. A couple other sports just to like again for comparison. WNBA was the big games were doing 1 to 2 million this year, and the finals do 1 million. MLS, couple of 100,000 on linear. Playoffs at NHL 1 to 2 million. MLB playoffs 4 to 7 million. So what does it tell us? I think what it just tells us, it tells me, I think it tells me this is that those numbers are real, really significant. It really emphasizes that UFC is a mainstream product. Now, the question is, will they be able to keep it up? Is the sport enticing enough that this isn't just novelty value driving these audiences and it's going to keep sustained or even grow? Because if it's going to grow, then wow, UFC is going to put up some serious numbers, and its popularity is only going to continue to skyrocket.
You made the comment before you went into some of the statistics. In the report I saw, it was claimed that 1 million new signups took place within 24 hours of the fight, with which they are largely crediting that. I mean, there'll be some people that just sign up that have no idea, but like they do think there's an emphasis behind that. So I guess the question I was going to ask you, Nick, is, fill in the blank. If you're Paramount Plus and you've made this 7-year, $7 billion investment after the first fight, you are feeling what?
Feeling rosy, feeling
Good,
feeling
yeah.
pretty positive. I think feeling pretty confident that this is on the right track. I can't think of what they would have expected that would be surpassed these numbers realistically for something that. I mean, obviously, American numbers are the focus. I've not seen anything. I follow a lot of the different sports channels, and I'm not seeing like huge overemphasis on the marketing of this. But granted, I'm not in the US, so maybe they've just been done doing it in a more targeted fashion. So I think they should be very, very happy with these first numbers. But again, there could be a bit of a halo effect, or it could be a bit of a novelty effect. But I'd be surprised if they don't see these numbers continue on at least for quite a while from here onward. So fair play to everyone involved. It seems like, I'd say, as a starting point, they should be pretty happy with how the economics might play out from here.
And I guess just the other question around that, and one of the other reasons why it is going to be difficult to compare the pay-per-view to what Paramount is doing, is the role of advertisement. We can, make a rough guess at how much they're making based off what the subscription prices are, but what we won't know is necessarily what they're making from an advertising perspective. And we're going to talk about Netflix after this. They've been very public about how much money they made off of advertising, but just sort of, it will be difficult unless Paramount decides to talk about that, kind of what the difference is between, the pay-per-view is the really high number, but we don't know what advertising is going to do to make up the difference in that gap. That we won't know. And I know there's some fans complaining about the advertising. And Dana White very much said, you're paying $8.99. You used to pay 80 quid. Like, you're going to have to expect something for those guys to make their money back.
Yeah, get back in your chair and sit
Yeah.
down, and otherwise fork out the extra cash. Yeah, I think that there's always going to be a behavioral change that people have to deal with, understanding that this is now going to be there after years of dealing with a super clean experience by pay-per-view. But I think Dana White's well in his rights to basically call everyone out, and I think that message will ring through pretty quickly to all fans who have been paying through the nose for basic access to these events for some time. That, you know what, I'm okay with this actually, and fair play to them. I am intrigued to see how much revenue that it does generate. That's the number one focus point of all streamers now, is how much more money they can generate from advertising. Is it going to be 20-30% more? Is it going to be more than that? But for these big events, these big tentpole events, these big live sports events, that's what advertisers are really keen on spending big money on now. So I think they'll be leaning more heavily into this as they go with bringing big brands to the table and spending big on advertising through those major events.
And slightly off piece, Nick, but I'm curious to know, was the movie The Goonies also a classic in Australia?
I'm familiar with the name of it,
Yeah.
but I've not seen it myself. So it could be a user error, as in not just, or an ignorance error. But I've not seen it, but I'm familiar with the name.
Well, it is a classic in America, and would definitely recommend it. Carl's definitely old enough; he would enjoy it. But basically, one of the quotes from that is "Goonies never say die." We had a podcast earlier where we talked about, is this the end of pay-per-view? Because not only UFC, but we saw what DAZN was doing with Riyadh seasons. We sort of were like, this may be the end of pay-per-view. Goonies never say die. It's one event. We got to see where it goes, but like, is pay-per-view, is it dead, now that we've actually seen it in action a little bit, or are we going to reserve judgment?
Well, I mean, the easy answer is to say we reserve judgment, but I
Yeah.
think this is a pretty good success story. It's about as successful as I think that they could have possibly hoped for to date. And if they continue to get the advertisers backing it well alongside the subs, then this should make it pay for Paramount's investment, I think. So I think there's a lot of confidence that this is the right approach. I think where pay-per-view might still play a role is for all those smaller tier events that can't generate the advertising funding and don't have a deal with someone like a Paramount. How do you get access to those things that, there's lower demand sports, but there might be small buckets of people that do want to get access to it. And I think that's where pay-per-view still plays a role, particularly at like grassroots sports level. And indeed, I think for fight sports as well. But at the top end, I think you'll continue to see for the near future um, big moves out of the pay-per-view space as long as they can get advertisers lining up to spend.
Yeah, well, a competitor to Paramount Plus, because there's the ongoing saga of what's going to happen with Warner Brothers, is Netflix. Netflix also came out with their Q4 numbers, which, again, you use the word rosy. It sounds like they're pretty rosy on things. They're talking about the Q4 revenue was up 18% year on year. Net income was up 29% year on year. Paid subscribers went from 300 million to 325 million. So, an increase of 25 million to that. Advertising revenues more than doubled, exceeding 1.5 billion, which is what I was referencing about, how much is that advertising money doing things. And I guess one of the things that came from this is Netflix did largely credit the introduction of live sports helping to drive some of those numbers, particularly subscriber numbers, as well as the advertising numbers. So I guess, Nick, I suppose you're not in a position to necessarily agree with Netflix. They're the one with the numbers and all that, but do you think that sports should be given as much credit as it has been for some of the growth that it saw in 2025?
I mean, they're the ones with the numbers, and it sounds like it has. The quote they used was, "It's delivered disproportionate excitement and signups." And that sounds
Yeah.
pretty good to me.
Yeah.
Look, they've been trying to supercharge their advertising business for some time, and since they've started investing into live sports, they've seen a pretty big bump in that revenue. Um, and they are crediting live events, sports as a big part of those live events, to much of that. A question for you: do you have Netflix, and do you get
Yes.
served ads on Netflix? Because I don't. I might be paying through the nose for it, but I think I've been signed up for so long I haven't paid attention now to what they're charging me.
I think I'm in the same boat as you, which is I have Netflix. I've never requested it, so I think it just naturally just bumped me up to whatever that tier is. So I get the ads when I watch the live sports, but that's just like the nature of live sports. So I don't get it when I'm watching on demand content.
Yeah, that's because I've noticed now watching Prime, I get served ads,
Yep.
and they're quite quick. They're like 6 second ads, a bit like YouTube style in terms of their pace and turnover. But the other day I watched TV4, which is like the Channel 4 here in Sweden, and it was the free service. And my God, the ads breaks were so painful. I just can't go back to watching with full blown ad breaks anymore. It just felt so wrong.
Well, that's what all the big
So
platforms want to hear, Nick. They want to hear that you'll pay the extra, ad-free subscription.
Well, that's it. Oh, clearly, but I do remember seeing some numbers that Netflix shared a while back, and I can't remember and I don't know if these still exist this way, but they were actually generating, once they launched the advertising product, they were actually generating more income from the people that weren't on the premium tier, but for the ones that were on the hybrid
Yeah.
of advertising and subscription. Now, I don't know if that's still the case,
Yeah.
and maybe I misread the numbers, but I thought that's an interesting anecdote just to think if they can get that pricing model right, make it more enticing for someone to subscribe and actually make more money through advertising. That's a nice little win for them. But yeah, I can't watch long form content now with an ad break randomly inserted in the middle of
Yeah.
some sort of scene. It just doesn't work for me. So, but look, but back to Netflix. I think they've come out actively. They're saying that they're thrilled with the results, both from driving subscribers, but also driving up ad revenue. And that's the name of the game.
And at the moment, they're still just doing events. They've not done anything with any sort of seasonality long term. But as you're reading through the tea leaves, is it difficult to imagine the idea that, like, the next time the NFL has their cycle coming around, which I believe they have the option to actually break their current deals, I think in like 2028 or 2029, they don't even have to
Yeah.
see it all the way out because of what they've talked about, specifically from driving subscriber numbers and then talking about the boom of the advertising. Does it feel like it's inevitable at this point that, like, they are going to stop doing just the Christmas games, the small stuff, and they're just going to flat out just go for it?
Well, I think about the ones that are currently spending today. You think about NBC and Peacock as an example, and they've got these different ways to maximize the value out of the rights to, say, the NFL or the
Yeah.
NBA as an example. I feel like because they need that linear platform for quite some time to get the maximum value out of audience for non-events based, non-needle moving things that those other platforms, and they're still struggling to make it work for profitability's sake. I still think we're a while away till they really go all in on one of the premium top tier
Yeah.
American sports at scale. But who can write them off now? Whatever they do, it seems to turn to gold. And um, if they can continue to build out their advertising machine, then I think them plugging in more and more longer term deals where they can build the right sort of dynamic with an advertiser to spend on a whim if they bring in something new to the table. I'm more interested though to see what they do outside the US now. Will they start to transfer this model and this success into other markets like Europe? Because it feels like they've got mainstream visibility and subscriber bases in a lot of the key mature Western markets. There's uncertainty and challenges in most of them around live sports in particular. Yet they haven't made it a real move for localized or semi-localized approaches on rights there of anything of significance. So, there's the TF1 deal in France where they're going to be producing, distributing the linear TF1 broadcast in France to Netflix subscribers, and they will have probably some live sports on that. So will that turn into something for them to test out to say, hey, there is really an appetite here that we can transfer for regular season activity? I just can't. I think they'll make a move at some stage, and the economics are going to get more and more favorable for them to make a move at some stage. But I would say final point is that still these markets I'm referring to, they don't have a lot of those event-based style relationships. We're talking mainly league-based stuff, and that's not their raison d'etre at the moment around like their sports approach. So it would probably be something like, I don't know, the Olympics or the Grand Slams or something that might be more appetizing for them to take on perhaps. So I'm not sure.
Makes a ton of sense, Nick. And yeah, I don't think we've seen much in Europe. And just to almost take things step back, and I referenced at the beginning, there's sort of this ongoing thing about, the cash offer to Paramount or to Warner Brothers and Paramount Plus trying to fight for it back and forth. I know this is going to be sports adjacent because it's not just about the sports element of it, but when you're thinking about the businesses as a whole, particularly like Netflix, what do some of these moves tell you in terms of maybe what their actual objectives are? And sports will only be one part of that larger strategy, but it just, these are not small moves when they're talking about the acquisition of Warner Brothers and everything that comes with it. Maybe just what you think is, I guess, the end game for some of these really big mergers and acquisitions.
Well, there's a couple of things we did think about. One is that Netflix have actively said also their biggest competitor right now is sleep. So that's one thing to
Yeah.
consider. Then there was an interesting stat that came out of these numbers, which I think paint a bit of a story here, that a lot of positivity around revenue. Basically, they're getting more bang for their buck out of each and every consumer than they ever have, right? But actually, they only had a 2% increase in consumption hours in the second half of last year. And you think about the growth of revenue, that means that as an aggregate and the growth of subscribers, that means on average that less people are on a per person basis are actually consuming content on the platform. So for me, it looks like they do have to looking a little bit further ahead, and they can afford to do this. What moves can they make to ensure they continue to be the Netflix of entertainment, be that destination that everyone's going to press on them remote controls or on their smart TVs as a first port of call, not the second or third, which some of their other competitors have right now. And so that's why the Warner Brothers Discovery move, I think, is something they have been considering. I'm not an expert. There's lots of people who know about this type of thing. And I do know that they don't have a lot of sport actually in that deal. So it is more about just the titles of and the studio that Warner Brothers have. But I imagine this is a little bit of how do they ensure they've got a really good long runway of great content to keep building up consumption, because they are acquiring audiences, but it does feel like the consumption is floundering just a little bit. Nothing. So it's not all roses. And I marry that up with sports. You think about all the NFL matches they've had and all these other live sports events they brought. They had Black Friday where they had sports all day long with golf and then the NBA and then the NFL. And then for numbers, they only got that marginal that sort of marginal nature, and think about the length of an NFL match. It's 4 hours long. I would have thought consumption would have been up way higher as a result of this. So I don't know. Maybe I'm reading too much into that stat, but I kind of feel like that's something that's showing that they've got a little bit of a consumption problem they need to address to make sure they continue to be the pioneers, the kingpins of the industry, basically.
Yeah, well, you're not the only one with that concern. Friend of the pod, she's been on before and she's been at several Sport for events. Marion Roche, she had a LinkedIn post which basically raised that point. And it was interesting. I was reading through some of the comments. Some people are sort of, hey, if the dollar signs are up, don't worry about it. And I think her response was a little bit more on your side, which is, that the two things have to be viewed together, and whether or not the engagement numbers are actually a forecasting that the money to numbers might actually come down if people aren't engaging. And it was interesting to see that back and forth. So, Nick, you aren't the only one that has that thought or saw that statistic and said, hold up a second here.
Well, it's good because Marion's very smart, and if she thinks it, then I feel validated by their speculation. But look, I think anyone running a media business these days, there's not always that linear nature between audience and revenue. Like sometimes you've got it at points where you might be growing the audience, and then you've got the audience. Now you've got to turn that into something, right? Well, in Netflix's case, those at peaks and troughs of having the content and then having the customer and then turning into revenue. Yeah, they're not exactly linear. It's therefore they might have to predict a little bit. Okay, these are little signs we have to get in early and make sure we're mitigating that. Oh, there's lots of speculation about why they're buying Warner Brothers just to screw over the other competition as well. But I'm not close enough to it to comment on that.
Best defense is a good offense, Nick. That's something the Cincinnati Bengals have taken too seriously. The last story we're going to talk about, Nick, and it's one that we've spent a bit of time, and we're going to spend time throughout 2026 talking about YouTube specifically, is here locally in the UK and the partnership that was reached with the BBC. What's really interesting here is they've entered a strategic partnership in an attempt for the platform, or I should say the public broadcaster BBC, to reach more younger and global audiences. This doesn't just include the BBC just simply uploading more content onto YouTube. This is BBC saying they are going to make content specifically for YouTube. YouTube First Programming talking about over the next 12 months, expect up to 50 new BBC YouTube channels. They've already said that the upcoming Olympics, which we referenced at the top of the show, will have exclusive content that is designed for YouTube. There's also some interesting things around training where YouTube's basically going to work with the BBC to kind of tell them, media producers and things like that, this is the best way to do this. I think something like the statistics where the BBC currently has 15 million subscribers to its YouTube channel. BBC Sports has 900,000. But then Barb, the agency over here that, monitors digital content, said that it's 52 people are on YouTube in the UK, which is, I think, just over 60 million population. So almost the whole population of the UK is on YouTube. So they want to get on it. So, Nick, we know, and we've talked about, the BBC does have a bit of a unique commercial proposition given the way the TV licensing works here, but just what you're already pretty positive about YouTube. What, I guess, a scale of 1 to 10, how much does this pique your interest that the BBC is taking such it seems like a significant step to invest in this new platform? I don't want to say new platform. The BBC is just so much older than YouTube. You got to give it a little bit of credit.
Yeah, just a little bit. But no, I get your point. It's a new platform to them in terms of really leaning into it. I thought what was most interesting about the announcement that they were going to create new and dedicated content for the platform. I don't think it's entirely surprising that they want to create something that's more attuned to YouTube consumers and streamers and perhaps younger audiences, given the nature of the platform. But initially I thought, well, BBC could just tomorrow start distributing UK relevant content on the platform and they'll be hitting new audiences. Look, it comes back to BBC, but with BBC, it comes back to what is their goal and their objective of an organization, because it is unique. It isn't like other platforms. My understanding of it is they are funded by the taxpayer through the TV licensing model primarily, and to basically their raison d'etre, again, I think I've used that more than once on this podcast already, but is to service and serve the UK audiences with great content, credible, be a credible source, etc., and serve their audiences, serve their people that are paying them, even though it's compulsory, with the content they want to get served. Now, by ignoring YouTube, and YouTube is now the most, as you pointed out, the most consumed platform in the UK, I feel like by not being there, that they are doing the taxpayer a disservice. They're not being where they are in the same way that they need to have a website on the internet. I think you kind of have to think about YouTube in this vein as like they've got to be there. If YouTube's the new TV, which some people say, then you have to be where people are consuming, not expect people to leave where they are, where they typically are day to day, to go find you on a different place and location. Now, I have seen some pushback and negativity around this.
I
People
have
thinking
too.
that, yeah, and I just felt like there's more of an existential question around big tech, social media that is probably fueling that negativity. But in my view, until something happens otherwise around that, they should be absolutely all in on serving their content through those channels to ensure they're maximizing the value that they're due to be serving to UK audiences. So I think it's not only a no-brainer. I can't really understand the negativity or pushback, other than people do like to be contrarian, um, and the risk is otherwise just no one's going to be consuming their stuff as decline is happening so rapidly on cross linear.
Yeah, the pushback I saw did have to do with the big tech angle, but it came more to, and this is probably where we talk about sometimes it's difficult to separate politics from sports and everything else, is that YouTube is an American based company. I think the argument was that this is a UK paid by taxpayers. How does that ultimately feel if some of that money is then ultimately going to the US? Was essentially, I think, the pushback I saw, which I mean, I get, but I think to your point as well, like if it is justifiable in the service that it's providing to the local taxpayer, that's just the cost of doing business, I suppose.
Well, look at it another way is that they obviously get a revenue share. I'm not doing a big. I don't want to do a big sell on YouTube, but I get the logic
Yeah.
to some extent. The revenue they generate on YouTube will be shared. YouTube take a cut, right, of everything they generate. Thinking about it the other way around is that by BBC leaning into their platforms, having 50 plus channels on available on YouTube, is they'll now be able to generate revenue from global audiences in a way they've never been able to do before.
Yeah.
Now, the economics around YouTube are not strong from a programmatic advertising perspective, but they're just opening up. So one of the biggest and best producers of content, definitely in the UK, if not the world, is now going to be available globally. They're going to be able to generate a whole bunch of income now that they weren't able to do otherwise. And I think that's not an insignificant part, which should offset some of the fact that they're giving money to a US based business. So I think it's not only it's a no-brainer, I think they have to be super committed to this as an approach. And I am intrigued to see what and how different their new content, this exclusive content they are creating, and also how much of their existing legacy stuff for linear and their traditional streaming channels is going to be used also on those platforms. But 50 different channels is a lot. So I'm
Yeah.
intrigued to see what all those different ones look like and feel like once they're up and running.
And it'll just be interesting to see what it looks like from a user experience because I've got BBC iPlayer, so I'm familiar with that platform looks like. I've also spent plenty of time on YouTube. Is it going to be some sort of hybrid? Are they going to build something bespoke, or is it simply going to be just your standard YouTube channels? Like, I would be curious to know how ingrained that partnership will be in terms of just the outlay of things. How will it look? What would feel like its own BBC channel, or is it going to just kind of be existing? So it will be interesting to see, like, even those layers of the user experience, how that'll differentiate from what exists with BBC's existing digital platforms and then what YouTube already has on its platform.
Well, absolutely. A couple other things just to flag or to mention is that for those that aren't familiar and outside of the UK, so the BBC isn't able to serve advertisements to UK audiences. So on those platforms, it will be ad free on YouTube. So the revenue creation will happen from outside of the UK from an advertising standpoint. I think that's just worth mentioning. And look, I've seen YouTube's top figures all shouting about it through every social channel possible, because this is the biggest validation, I suppose, for YouTube to say, everyone come to us, work with us. We're the place where you need to be. Channel 4 has already lent into this quite heavily. They've probably been very much one of the pioneers and broadcasters leaning into YouTube and broadcasting content on the platform, making it available there. So I think the YouTube will be shouting about the fact that BBC's joined them to this level for quite some time and be pushing this in everyone's faces. And the other final bit I was curious to see if it was going to be connected with, which I haven't heard any mention of it, is remember they launched that primetime channels concept I've heard nothing about that since. So I don't know if that's been a bit of a flop for them for whatever reason, because it sounded great on paper, but maybe they're just going to look into creating their own channels, like you said, and just build a network of them that they can use to target different audience segments, I guess.
So I'm sure you two will be hoping the answer to this question is yes, Nick. But do you see this as the first of several steps that'll look similar like this to other public broadcasters taking this similar approach? Is this? I guess that's the next question. Is you know what's next? Do other people follow this? Because I don't think the BBC will be the only people having an existential crisis about where audiences are. And to your point, do we want to fight the effort to make them come to us, or do we just go to where they're already at?
It's a great question, and I think it's almost inevitable that we will see others follow. Again, YouTube's probably worked really hard to get a deal done with BBC, so they make this commitment, whether it's the education, whether it's the commercials, etc., because they'll use it as a case study to then sell into each and every market they exist in. I posted something on this the other day. It was off the back of Steve's story around Match of the Day numbers. I don't know if you saw that, but basically Match of the Day, it's the BBC's premier highlights show that's been running for generations, decades. Yeah, that they've had that on their linear channels historically, and they've also got it on iPlayer and the BBC's website, app, etc. The numbers on linear have dropped by more than 10% in just 12 months, right? So that's dropped by 770,000 viewers. And the website is gone up by about 20 odd percent, I think, to 1.5, 1.69 million, depending on which statistic you're using. So my point there is the numbers have gone down by about 770,000. On their own digital channels, it's gone up by probably about 300,000. So that's an incredible rate of decline. Positive that the digital numbers are going up, but at 770,000 dip, that means they need to find those audiences from elsewhere. And that's why YouTube is clearly, given what we said about the barred numbers, that's where they are. So that's why they have to lean into that. And I'd expect them to put more of their sports content on the platform. Like Match of the Day is inevitable. It would end up on YouTube in the future. Maybe they can't do it at the moment, though, because of the existing rights agreement, would be my guess.
Yeah, we'll see. But again, another really interesting story, something for us to follow through 2026. And yeah, we said it'd be a big year. We said it'd be an exciting year. Nick, I was a little pessimistic at the start of the year. You heard the first podcast. But some rosier things coming up. Maybe, I just had to get through it a little bit. Maybe I was just going through some stuff. Maybe I didn't get enough sleep with the newborn, Nick. But it's a little bit more positive today.
Well, there's always lots of things going on at the moment. I remember having a bit of a lull about 1 or 2 years ago. I'm like, oh, is this? There's not much going on. It's like pretty basic sort of storylines, and now there's all sorts of little nuances happening in the industry, which makes it a lot more fun to talk about. So I'm all here for it.
Awesome. Well, Nick, it was a pleasure as always to get to chat with you. And then I will say, we're gonna do a double pod drop next week. So if you're listening to this, there'll be another one coming out in just a couple of days. Basically, our most ever watched guest will be back, Mr. Dan Rayburn. So I don't think that's spoilers or anything like that, Nick. But double pod next week or this upcoming week as you're listening to this.
Absolutely, we'll be doing a preview to the Super Bowl, and also we're going to be meeting in person for our next StreamTime event. I'll be heading to London for that, which we're hosting at TikTok's offices, and we'll have DAZN, TikTok, and a few others on stage there talking about how to monetize social. So lots to talk about. We'll share some of that, some of that content and some highlights from that with you all following that event.
Well, thank you, everybody. We'll catch you next episode.